keep explaining it. So now what we are going to be doing, now we have the index file, that's it, just see it as a default, and also the component. We are going to be creating a navbar component. So let us call that navbar. You now know how to create folder. Now you just click on to create folder, to create a file. You just click on the folder that want to house the file, that want to add the parent of the file. So once you click on that, you just come to this icon, new file, then you click on it, it will create the new file for you. And now I'll just call that navbar to be my navigation bar component. So navbar.jsx, which is a JavaScript object. All right, so now that we have that, the next thing now is for us to create our navigation bar. And to create it, you don't need to cram anything. Just first, when you create a file in Next.js, to make it easier, of course there's a shortcut to do this, but just to practice our typing skill, our coding skill, let's just write it manually. So let's create an arrow function first. So you do const navbar, the name of the function, equals to, then you have a function, then you have an arrow function, then whatever you want to export from this navigation bar component, you just do return and you put it in between this space. I can just do h1 and I'll say navbar, just say navbar. So once you create this arrow function, this is the name of the function. So you can see we have the constant, the name of the function, then, and if you are passing any parameter to the function, you pass it through this place, and the body of the function will be this. And when you hear the word function in coding, it means a code block. So this is the code block in this case. So each this code block now, you are attaching it to this name. This is the name of the function, and this function name will be executing this particular block. And once you do that, you can now export default navbar. So export default navbar, so that once any file is referencing this particular file, then it can just pick this up as the export file. So it's because I want to use it, I want to use this particular block outside of this function, outside of this file, then I need to export it. If I'm only using it inside this file, then there might not be any need to export it, but since I want to use it outside this file, then I also need to export it. Now that we have that, we then go ahead to also import it here in the index file. So in the index file, I'll just say, don't worry, all these steps, they are repetitive. So once I do this, we go to the next component, I do it again, you notice a pattern, so that when you're implementing your own tool, that's the same pattern that you're going to be following. So, but for now, just try to follow along. So I'll just import navbar. Don't forget navbar. I'm importing the component navbar, which is this. Then I'm import component navbar. Where am I importing it from? You can see that index and navbar, they are in this same folder. They are in the same folder. So all I just need to do is just look for it in the current folder. Look for it in the current folder. What are you looking for? You're looking for navbar, which is this. So assuming I want to look for it maybe inside this source folder, then I just say / to come out of the folder. I can see that when I do / you can see I can see the parent folders. Like I'm currently now in the source folder. So I can see that app is in the source folder, component is in the source folder, context is in the source folder. So but for now, I'll just limit it to just one dot, because both index.jsx, which is there, and also the navbar.jsx, they are in the same folder directory, and that is why I don't need to do a double dot. And once I'll be able to import it, I'll just export navbar. So all the components, so that it will be easier for me to call from outside this particular page. In order to be sure that our component has been successfully installed, our setup, I'll just come to the default page. Don't forget our default page, which is always inside this app, and this is its page. So I'll just erase this since I'm done using this. I'll erase this. So I'll just import from the word import. I'm bringing it into this file. So I'll just import navbar from components. So you can see I'm importing navbar. So when you put it inside these curly braces, it means that you are not exporting it as default. So if you are exporting it as default, you don't need to put it inside these curly braces. Because if it is default, for example, if you look at this particular one, here I'm exporting it as default. So when I want to import it from this file, you can see when I wanted to import navbar from this file, I did not need to use curly braces because I have exported it from this file as default. But when it comes to now I now imported it, then I export it again. But in this case now, I'm not exporting it as default. And that is why when I'm importing it here, I should use curly braces because I'm exporting it not as default. But if I'm doing it as default, then I don't need to use curly braces. But the beauty of this is that I can easily do navbar, I can do hero, I can do button with just one line of code. But if I have to export it as default, then I will have to do it with several lines of code. I will have to do button, I will have to do hero, I will have to do all this, which might make my code to be unnecessarily too bulky. It will still work, but just that I might end up having more lines of code. Alright, so we just close this. So it's easier that way to do it just one line. So once you have been able to import it into this file, then you can use it. How do you use it? You just use it like this, navbar, and you make it a self-closing tag since you are not passing anything in between it. So if you are passing something as a child element now, then you can now say, okay, you want to have it as navbar, then you can now pass whatever you want to pass here. But since you are not passing anything, then you can just make it a self-closing tag. A self-closing tag. So I will just save and see if we have our navbar. So let's go back to our application. Then I refresh. You can see I have the navbar already. Navbar. So which is coming from this point. So if I change this to 1, for example, and I save it. So to save, just to Control K, Control X, or you can also come to this file and then you do save all. So make sure you save all your file because you might end up editing multiple files at the same time. So it's good that you save everything so that you can see your changes being effected. And if you can see that they even give you the shortcut to do that. So if you do Control K, just wait for some moments and then press X. You don't need to wait too much, just do Control K, leave it, then press X. It will save all the files. So if you are using a Mac too, I think it might be Command K, then press X. Or if you come to this file menu item, then you'll be able to see the option to save all. You can see the you can also see the command to do that beside it. But if you prefer to autosave, you can also put the autosave on, but personally I don't like to autosave, so you can just do the autosave if that will work for you. Whichever case, is still the same thing, it just depends on our personal preference. Right, so you can see now that we have navbar 1. So it's now time for us to code our navigation bar. Told you, you don't need to cram, you don't need to panic, you don't need to be afraid. Just come to the documentation, they have everything for you there. So you just pick the component that you need from the documentation, then you use it. So if you come to the documentation, you just come to components, look for components, you see all the components that they have for you. They have the code for you. You can just pick these codes and use it. Alright, so now the component that we are currently looking for is the navigation bar. So I'll just come navigation bar. Alright, you can see nav bars. So I'll just scroll, looking for a particular one that is responsive. So if you keep scrolling, you see the one that is responsive. Now you can see it here. Responsive behavior, the one that when you toggle the navbar, it opens the menu on a small screen, and on the last screen it shows the menu. So let us use this. So it's also important that you copy, and when you copy, you must be able to update the code to suit what you need it for. So let's just copy this. Just watch, and once you do 2 or 3 times, you'll be able to notice the pattern and be able to effect it. You'll be able to conduct that yourself. So I'll just copy this. You can see where I copied from. Navbar. So once I do that, I'll erase this. Now open a bracket. Now paste what I copied. So once I paste what I copied, you can see that I need some components which from React Bootstrap. So I will just come and import it, every component you are going to be using. And in case you are not sure, it's a thing you can also come back to the documentation and also pick it from there. So if I go back to the documentation, I can see the component that they use. So I can just copy it. I will modify this to suit my own need. And that is the benefit of knowing all these things. So just copying and pasting, you know how to update the code effectively, and that is what you actually need. There's no need to cram. So I'll just put copied, container. This container, I'll put it here. You can see when they are importing it as default, they are not using curly brace, but when I need to import it not as default, then I need to put a curly braces so that I can do more than one at a time to save me having to write several lines of code. Use command to separate it. So once I have that, I'll just delete it. So I'll just delete it. So I'll just save. Now let's see our navigation bar now. Let's see the navigation bar. So it's refreshing, and now refreshing unsupported component type. So in this case, now when you see something like this, of course you might not need to disturb yourself too much with the technical aspects of the implementation, but now it's saying unsupported server components type undefined. So meaning that there's something in Next.js that we have the server side rendering and we also have the client side rendering. So when you start using client side for a server side rendering, by default Next.js render every element as server. But by the time you start using the client component, you need to now tell it to use clients as to using this server rendering for default rendering. So now it's telling me that server component type undefined. So that means that I'm using a client side component for, by default Next.js always do server side rendering. You don't need to disturb yourself too much. Just to correct that error, I'll just say use client. Just say use client so that it will not treat it as a default server side rendering. Since I'm using a client side rendering, then I should just use client. So you can see now that I have my navigation